There's a tension where it'd be easy to not do this. It'd be easy to say, oh, well, let's just keep living in the background and doing what we're comfortable with. But I have this bigger vision where I can teach and show others you can achieve what you want to achieve. You can overcome these challenges. Where you're at is not where you have to stay.
Welcome to Vet Life Reimagined. Imagine you are fresh out of vet school and are headed to a rural location away from your family to join a single doctor mixed animal practice. And within a couple of weeks, you are faced with being the only veterinarian. This is what our guest, Dr. Kelly Cooper, was faced with, and we'll discuss how not only she managed this scary situation, but also grew the practice and was invited to start speaking about her success. That 15-year journey was just the start as she discovered more about herself and learned to overcome imposter syndrome to find new avenues for herself, all while dealing with several personal challenges. She worked for Banfield for about a decade and now runs her own business called Reality Vet Coaching and Consulting, providing leadership and practice management coaching for veterinarians. Dr. Cooper has a fascinating story, so let's get to the conversation with Dr. Kelly Cooper. When did you know you wanted to get into veterinary medicine?
Oh, that's a great question. And thank you very much for having me on the podcast, Megan. I'm really excited to be here. So I am one of those people who decided as a child, I wanted to be a veterinarian. Probably, I think it was around age 8 or 9. My mom always had like cats in our lives, but I don't think they got much veterinary care. And I remember my first exposure to a veterinarian, a man in a white coat, right? Like that kind of embodied the, oh my, I wanted, this is amazing. And I think we took a cat to him and got vaccines or something like that. And I thought, I want to do this. Like, this is amazing. And then as I got older, kind of my teen years, I started reading the James Herriot books and, which reinforced it. And I was always rescuing some sort of something and bringing it home. So it was definitely a childhood dream, that thankfully I was able to kind of bring to life and make real.
Now, when you were thinking about what you might do, like as you're getting into vet school, did you have an idea of what career was going to look like? And did that change over time during vet school?
Yeah, it changed a lot for me. At first, I imagined I was going to be a wildlife veterinarian. And that's also my generation. What we had was, I think, Saturday Night, Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom. We had James Herriot. This is way before Animal Planet. And so our, exposure to like the wild and wildlife and working in that field was that. I mean, it was very limited. So I had this big vision that I was going to go work with wild animals or work in zoos. And then as I got into pre-vet and kind of had some exposure to professionals in those spaces, and they actually started talking about, here's what that's like. I was like, oh, maybe I don't want to do that. And my experience was cats and dogs. Like that's, growing up in kind of the burbs and, that's what I had knowledge of. And then as I went into veterinary school, I developed this love for agricultural lifestyle. And, so I pursued a mixed animal track, which led me out to a rural practice in New Mexico, because I thought, kind of that whole James Herriot vibe is I'm going to be all things to all people. I love the idea of a small town vet. And I had done my preceptorship in a very tiny town in the Texas Panhandle. And so I thought, this is it. I'll just go be the small town vet. That will be my whole career. I will retire and sell my practice there. And that was my vision. I thought that was the end all and be all of veterinary medicine for me, which turned out not to be the case at all, of course.
Yes. And to share, you did do your vet school at Oklahoma State University. Yep. So you graduate. And so feel free to share how, that evolution of all these different things you were exploring in vet school. And I think that's a good thing about vet school is we do get to try all things out. And a lot of times we're like, oh, I just like a little bit of everything. And we start to get into practice and we kind of figure out where our zone of genius or where we like to fit in kind of comes. But what was that like for you?
Yeah. So when I came out of school and I had this vision, this rural practice life, I didn't know where I wanted to live. I kind of had a list of things I did not want to do, but not a lot of clarity on where I wanted to go or what I wanted to do. I was kind of in a place with my family where going back home was not an exciting idea. I was like, I want to go explore and do something else. And I feel like there's a few moments in your life where the world is your oyster. And I think that's a really exciting time for everybody because you can go any direction and you can make anything of yourself. It can also be really overwhelming though. And therefore, it's like, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do. And you get frozen, I'm paralyzed by that. So I was interviewing with some equine hospitals. I know I went out to Albuquerque and I went out to Houston, and I was just like, what am I going to do? And I had a professor at Oklahoma State that approached me, and he had been out in practice in the Oklahoma Panhandle. And he had a friend that was in Southeast New Mexico that really needed a doctor. He's like, he really needs help. He's getting up there. He didn't say that, right? But he was past retirement, should we say. And so Megan, my decision fell on the fact that my boyfriend lived not an hour away from that town. So not exactly a career decision, but I thought, wow, I'll go out here. I'll have a lot of independence. I'll have a lot of freedom. My boyfriend will be an hour away. So that'll be nice. So I say that I followed a boy, which I kind of did. And so I find myself, in Southeast New Mexico, a town of about 6,000 people. I am the only vet, and I get there, and within 2 weeks of my arrival, the owner gets badly injured by a bull, and he leaves. And he basically moves an hour and a half away and suddenly retires, and I'm running his veterinary practice, and I'm 2 weeks out of veterinary school. So that, well, I did want independence, and he had some health problems, so it wasn't like a total shock. Like, I think I kind of asked for what I got for it. And when I got it, I just didn't think it would be within 2 weeks of getting out of school.
Wow. I mean, for anybody who is a vet, we're all like, oh, what would we do?
Yeah.
And actually, I have had one other story that I can remember off the top of my head where it was kind of a similar situation. I think she came brand new veterinarian, and the practice owner either got hurt or something, and they were the vet. So how did you handle that?
Yeah. Well, I would lie if I said there weren't tears, because there were lots and lots of tears. And, thankfully, I love our profession. I love what we do. I love being a veterinarian. I'm an optimist. So I just figured I'd figure it out. It's like, okay, let's take it one day at a time. I was learning how to be a veterinarian. You take all that knowledge from school, but you still have to learn how to apply that. So I was figuring that out. I also moved into, to a culture that was very much, you're not going to fill old Dr. So-and-so's shoes, like, who are you, young lady? There's actually, I just did a presentation where I showed the article that the newspaper released, and it's titled, "The Vet is a Lady," is how this newspaper article was titled, of announcing my presence in the town, right? So there are definitely some cultural things I had to overcome. A lot of just trying to figure out how to survive. And then also I'm suddenly leading a team of people, and I don't have leadership skills. I don't have business skills. I'm just figuring it out. So I made friends with a retired veterinarian in the county that was good friends with the owner that I was working for. And he was amazing. Like, he was just very savvy, had his own business, was very current on his medicine, even at the age of like 75. He was just in the game. And he was my phone a friend. I could pick up the phone and say, hey, I have this fractured femur. A dog got kicked by a horse, and he drove on up, and he, showed me that I could do it, basically, or I had some sort of this happened or that happened. He was amazing. Like, he was just, my person that was there. And thankfully, the veterinarians in the county, there are very few of us. I think there were a total of 5 veterinarians in the biggest county in New Mexico. So it's a very vast and rural place. Had dinner once a month as well. And so thankfully they were collegial, even though there was like 3 clinics and 5 vets, there was a lot of sharing, and, I could call someone and say, hey, I need help with this, or I don't understand how to do that. So I think that was my lifeline, that kept me sane. And then I actually ended up meeting my then later to be husband, who was also a veterinarian that lived in the county, and he had a small animal background. And so that kind of provided some support for me, emotionally, as I kind of dove into medicine and leadership all at the same time.
Yeah, that is a lot. I love the idea of having like a monthly dinner that all the vets can kind of come together, and because
Yeah.
there's plenty of work for everyone, right? So
Yeah.
hopefully it's not like a competitive nature, but you also probably share a lot of similar types of clientele, and just kind of supporting each other from a lot of different perspectives, whether it's business or emotional, especially I think you said there was three practices and 5 vets. So, I mean, several of those had to be solo practice veterinarians. And so I think that it can get kind of lonely if you don't have somebody who kind of knows what you're going
Absolutely.
through.
Yeah, absolutely, Megan. I think it's one of the challenges of independent veterinary practices is that we very much get on our islands and we don't connect with our neighbors that much. And I think it's just or naturally, a lot of us are introverts, right? We kind of stay in our bubble and do our thing and just put our head down and work. And we don't really place value on the network and the relationships that are around us that can support us. Even if it's a competitor, there's a lot of pets to go around, right? There's a lot of patients that are out there. And that's one of the things that is important to me in the work that I do is showing doctors, especially in the independent setting, that community around you is incredibly important and to make efforts, to grow it. Because when you don't know your neighbor, it's easy to villainize them, right? It's easy to kind of say, oh, well, they this and they that. But when that's a face and a person and somebody that you know, you don't do those things because you have more empathy for them and you know what they're going through and they know what you're going through. And so we're so much more powerful together, even though we're all trying to do the same thing. And it feels like competition is we all wear the same hat, and it's so important to have that community around you.
Yeah. And I think even if you have a fantastic team of technicians and practice managers, which are all essential and they make this work fun and doable, it's still a little bit different. Like everybody's role is slightly different. So if you don't have somebody to kind of bounce off these ideas, and sometimes I think especially if you are leading, like you don't necessarily want to bounce off every idea that pops into your head, right? The rest of the team, right? It's good to have a space where you can share some of those out loud. Yeah.
Yeah. And when it's as much as we want to say and believe that our team are the same as us, they're not. Especially when you are the owner, like being a doctor is a unique role from being a technician or a receptionist. And you want someone who really understands what that means, to collaborate with and to commiserate with. Same thing for ownership. They say heavy is the head that wears the crown, where a practice owner wears the crown and nobody else can do that for them or really understand what that's like. And so when practice owners talk to one another and unite with one another, that's where they say, hey, I'm not in this alone. You all understand me. And so, that's kind of like the tribe, that's my true peers and my people, even though let's say your clinic team's your family, those peers that you have around you is really the people who fully understand what life is like when you're wearing the same hat.
And you mentioned that this was soon to be husband after this time. And so did you guys end up joining practices or how did that evolve?
Yeah. No, he was an associate veterinarian in the next town. So my first year, just to kind of move the story forward, Megan. So my first year of scrambling and figuring out how to run a practice led me to desire to own that practice because I worked so hard on, you take a lot of ownership on when that's like, here, go figure this out. And the owner's in absentia, right? Like they're not really that involved. And so I was like, well, why not buy this practice? I love this little town. I love where I'm at. And so my ex-husband, so I'm giving away the story a little bit, but he came and, joined me in the practice. So we were working together. It's probably like a 1.5 doctor practice at best. I did a lot more of the large animal work and he did more of the small animal work, but it was a good mix. It worked for a long time and until it did not, but it was great to have a partner in crime going through all of that.
Yeah. And I think I read somewhere that you massively grew this business too. I mean, yes, I'm sure having another doctor help, but you said like 1.5 doctors. So, I mean, the percent is more than just doubles that I saw.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it took years. I bought what they call the no-low practice, right? It was a little tiny kind of dying practice that undercharged and had kind of ceased to grow itself a long time before. And when I dug into learning and understanding what it takes to lead people and run a business and really engage with your clients is when we really started to flourish. And so what was nice is, this little tiny practice, this little tiny town over the years became an incredibly well-known location where I had people coming from like 100 miles away to come see us, or clients that would move away and come back to us for years. They're like, oh, I'll drive an hour to come see you all. It doesn't matter. And so in having like a high level team that was so collaborative and just functioned incredibly efficiently and very well and incredibly empowered was just such a privilege to lead. And that was like a 15-year journey for me, Megan, because I was just figuring it out. It's kind of like, okay, what's possible, what can I do? Growing my own leadership, self-awareness and working with my team was I'd say a long, slow, painful process with little wins. And, you step forward, then you get hit and you fall back and, you keep trying, you stand up and you brush yourself off and you do it again and you keep going. So yeah, I felt like even though, by maybe other people's standards, we were still a small practice in a small town, all my reps would come through and they're like, why are you here? Like, you need to go somewhere and go do other things. And I actually had one of my reps ask me to speak to a group of women veterinarians in Albuquerque about change management, and I was honored to be asked to do that. I was like, well, why would little old me, go talk to a bunch of big city women, that are practice owners and teach them what I knew? But it was so fulfilling. It was part of what inspired me to a future career change, why I ended up selling my practice and going into leadership over time.
Which I want to get to. I want to highlight, though, that thank you for putting that in perspective, though, too, because I don't want people to think, oh, wow, 1 year out of practice and she, grows this business 480%. Things take time. And it is, leaning into these experiences, that 1% of learning how to do something just slightly better, right? Like all of those things can really add up into that 15-year experience where you were really thriving. I know you mentioned that you had plenty of burnout moments, you said in practice, and you even described that you had moments where you wanted a hole to open up and just follow you. Like that's how overwhelming some of these things got. What are some of the things that you would share with people who might be in similar situations where it's a practice, it's, 15 years when you're in the middle of it, it seems like a long time. What kept you going? What were you starting to learn about yourself? And what are these things that you would kind of share with others as they're veterinarians going through practice?
Yeah, well, I'd say we all go into this with all of us, well, most of us go into it with a lot of passion. We're not here to get rich. We're not here because, we think, well, it's really lucrative industry. Let's go become veterinary medicine. We do it because we're very passionate either about animals or about how we impact society and medicine and solving problems. And then when you get into the day-to-day of it and the ups and downs, that come with let's talk about just being a veterinarian. We talk about just the emotional roller coaster of our lives. You walk into a new puppy and, get to celebrate, and then you turn around and you have to go do a behavioral euthanasia with somebody, who's just torn to bits because it's a hard thing that you have to do and that they have to do. And, at the same time, we're fighting this level of constant perfectionism. I feel like and I'm what I call a recovering perfectionist, and I'm a big Brene Brown fan. And that's what's helped me get through a lot of my challenges is that, so you have highs and really I learned I had to celebrate the highs and stop and recognize that I could do a lot of things well. And so like I kept every little card a client gave me or little comments, and our team would always make a point of encouraging and celebrating one another. Because if I didn't grab those moments, nobody else was going to grab them for me. There's so many of them. And we just feel like, oh, okay, well, it's just my job, right? That's just my job. And we let those go. But then the few horrible things that might happen, right? Like maybe it's a really angry client. Maybe it's a case that went wrong. Maybe it is a mistake that happened. We let those so overshadow the good. Those just build up and they stay in our mind, and we ruminate on them and we beat ourselves up. I remember a time, laying on the floor of my office, probably at 9:00 at night, just in tears saying, well, I need the board to just come take my license and tell me I can't practice anymore because I'm the worst ever. Like, why did they let me do this? It survived, right? Like whatever what survived. But I just beat myself up because in hindsight, I realized I had made some mistakes in my decision making. But in the moment, I didn't know that, right? I did the best I could with what I had. And so, it's being able to pick yourself up, put that in balance. And for me, survival relied on community. Me in my own head by myself would never have made it through, ever. There's no way. because by yourself, you only see this, right? You only see this little bit of the world. And for me, it was a bit of a spiritual walk at the time. So I was learning leadership, but I was learning a lot about myself because I was part of a women's Bible study group that met like on Monday mornings. And when I went in that group and there's prayer circles, right? That talks about everybody who has cancer and whose kid got hit by a car, or who's, like there's all this care for the community. And you realize, oh my gosh, that little thing I thought was a mountain is not a mountain. It's a moment, but look at what other people are going through. And so that helped align my perspective on what I thought, in my little universe was so critical and would in my career or, cause nobody to want to come to me anymore was a nothing. And I think, in that time in my life, that's what got me through was a belief that there was something more important and bigger than just what I was doing in that community of some veterinarians in my life, but a lot of non-veterinarians that were housewives, right? And volunteers and, teachers that really broadened my perspective to like, I'm not all that, right? Like, this is not all that. Like, let it go, move on, and it will pass. Like, this too will pass.
Very important to remember. But I love that when you got invited and maybe you had a little bit of imposter syndrome. Why are they asking this rural vet to come talk in the big city? And you were able to share some of these things. And you said that this was kind of a moment of you realizing that, maybe there's some other opportunities that I can stretch myself. So what was your experience when you gave that talk, and what did that start to make you think about?
Yeah. So I felt so humbled and privileged. I drove up to Albuquerque and these, wonderful, amazing women, are sitting in a conference room together. And I basically shared, I didn't even know change management was a thing at the time, Megan. Like there's a whole discipline, right, around change management. And the internet was not a place you went and pulled all the information. There wasn't AI. You could see like, hey, tell me all about change management. So I built my own kind of curriculum on this talk that in hindsight, now I am trained and certified in change management. I was like, oh yeah, hey, I got that right. Like I pretty much did it. But it was fun to just take the stories of my success, right? These little wins in my own practice of changing certain behaviors and tasks in my hospital and give them those tools, right? It felt very empowering to be able to say, hey, here's the 5 simple things that happened that made this work. And, and they were like, oh, that's amazing. Thank you for sharing. They were just so very gracious and welcoming. I did not feel like I didn't belong, at the table or to share with them. And that was a big encourager for me to say, hey, maybe one day I'll do this for real. Like this will be a thing that I do. And here I am, I don't know, like 15 years later, it's doing it.
Yeah, which is funny because I do remember you saying that was one of the things you would not have seen yourself doing is like a lot of public speaking. So
yeah, I have a vision. I guess I equate it to the idea of wanting to be a rock star, right? Or wanting to be famous is you see people who are up there like, oh, they're so amazing. But the tension in that for me is I am an introvert and I didn't like talking to people. Like how I talk now, nobody would know. I love to meet people and get to know about them. Starting that is very hard for me. Like just getting to the, hi, I'm Kelly. It's so nice to meet you is the hardest thing for me. And putting myself out on the stage or my ideas feels still that imposter syndrome, right? Still lives there and hovers beneath the surface. And so there's a tension where it'd be easy to not do this. It'd be easy to say, oh, well, let's just keep living in the background and doing what we're comfortable with. But I have this bigger vision where I can teach and show others, hey, you can achieve what you want to achieve. You can overcome these challenges. Where you're at is not where you have to stay. And I can't do that if I don't push myself out of that comfort bubble and get myself up on a stage or on a podcast or write, and put out articles, even though that voice in my head is always still there. It's like, well, who are you? Who are you to do those things? And I have to stop and be like, I have this knowledge. I do have this ability. People do need this information and be quiet. Be quiet, inside voice.
Yes. Also really important. I think we are the harshest to ourselves a lot of times. Like we would never say what we say to ourselves inside of our heads to our friends. And so that a moment to kind of like stop and think is like, I would not say this to my friend. So let me think about this. Let me be a little kinder to myself. And I think also trying to avoid those or not listen to that voice, because that is the barrier to actually sometimes achieve what we really want to. The things that make us happy and successful, sometimes it requires things for us to do that are uncomfortable. That being able to get over those voices allows us to move through the uncomfortable to get to this place that we can be happy and successful and contribute in the way that we're wanting to.
Yeah, I love that, Megan. You just remind me of it's a lot of little acts of courage is what this is about. Because I remember in that 15 years of practice, every time I was very anxious or fearful or uncomfortable of what the outcome might be, that held me back from doing the thing. And maybe it was a conversation I need to have with my team member. Maybe it was asking for feedback or making a decision that felt like a hard decision. Is that the first emotion that would hit me, and I think hits a lot of people, is fear. But what if this could happen, that could happen? And those are all stories that we build up inside our head that turn out not to be true. They just turn out not to be true. So pushing past that little fear and doing it anyway, even if it's a small, tiny little baby step, I felt always had big rewards. It was a phrase I say is, when you do good things happen. Even if it's this tiniest little thing, I always felt like I was rewarded for overcoming the fear and at least putting the effort forward. And maybe that reward was just learning. Maybe that reward was something big came of that, a change in a relationship, a change in something that happened in the practice and how it was run. And, it's interesting how much we get in our own ways. I believe we are what's great about us, right? Who we are. That is what is great about us. And it's also what's wrong with us at the same time, right? Two sides of the coin. So got to lean into what's great and mitigate what doesn't work for us, right? Mitigate the okay, well, here's how I'm getting in my own way, and either develop it or just understand that that's all that's going to be there. And I just have to find ways around it or over it to kind of mitigate or manage. Because I feel like there's lots of things we're not going to necessarily change fundamentally about who we are, that the things that trip us up, but we can still lean into our strengths and navigate around those things or operate and succeed in spite of them.
Yeah. And I think this is really helpful in our career when we are trying to go through potential evolutions and changes with our career as well. And so you had a big transition. You went from owning this hospital after 15 something years, and then you actually get introduced into corporate leadership with Banfield. So what was the evolution of your career? What were you thinking and kind of leaning into when you got a job with Banfield?
Yeah, I ended my practice ownership career because I had, even though, as I said earlier, I thought this would be my end all, right? I would retire and be the small town vet forever. After my 15 years, I'd grown this love of developing others and really helping them be as successful as they could at what they did, whichever role, right? Practice manager, my technician, my receptionist was excellence and engagement and satisfaction, for each of those roles. And so as much as I loved medicine, I pursued that. And so I started looking out to see in the industry, what are the opportunities that are out there? And that's when Banfield was hiring a lot of field leadership. And I didn't know a thing about Banfield at all because I was very rural. And I did some checking. I had some classmates, that were either knew of them well or worked with them. And so, as I looked around, I was like, well, why not? Let me throw my hat in the ring. And it was a district manager role or a medical director role in Oklahoma. So that would be overseeing 14 hospitals and about 30 doctors. And I wrote up a resume and sent it in. He gave it to the recruiter, said, hey, I don't know if you're interested in this little small town doctor, but here's who I am and here's what I have to offer. And surprisingly, they snatched me up and I was onboarded within a month. It was insane. The speed was incredible. And I still owned a practice and my husband was back home and I was living in New Mexico and hired in Oklahoma. So that was a big, life disruption. I ended up getting my practice sold, relocated my family to Banfield and started, kind of that corporate culture life, which was incredibly thrilling because, and I definitely saw the difference between an independent practice ownership in a corporate world of practice life. because I went from being an entrepreneur and like the head on the horse, right? That bears, like I said, heavy is the head that wears the crown. Well, in a corporate world, you are a group of people. Corporate, by definition, is a group makes decisions. A group makes things happen. And so my biggest life lesson in that was that I had to slow down and bring people along with me. Things I thought were a really cool idea maybe had impact in other places I hadn't thought about. So I had to partner in, I had a business partner and I had an HR partner, I had people I had to kind of like say, hey, what do you think of this idea? Can we do this? And that was a hard lesson for me. I got kind of slapped upside the head, metaphorically speaking, because I had launched and done something in my market that had an impact on the operations that it just hadn't occurred to me, that it would. And so, yeah, that was a quick lesson. What I loved about the corporate life, especially at that level, was that it was a team approach, right? You don't have to go get that community because it naturally exists around you and everybody has the same desires and the same goals and you're working together to achieve something. I loved working with the doctors and with the teams, and every hospital was different, and just the development I was able to get through that, my leadership development, my business skills, just so many things that just came to me because it's part of the job. Either they're investing in you and developing you, or you're learning on the fly because you're surrounded by people who have this experience. It was pretty awesome. And so while there were painful moments of the transition, as all do have, I was incredibly thankful, to lean into this development of myself and be able to impact, I could impact more pets by impacting more people who serve pets. And again, in this profession, that's what we do, right? We impact our society through animals. So that was my big why.
Yeah, I completely relate to the team approach and the team feel. I have a lot of enthusiasm, but it really can build when I'm around other people and we're kind of putting in our different perspectives and we're all working towards this goal together. I think is really exciting. And you also mentioned a couple things. You were interested in getting into this new role because you wanted more opportunity to help grow other people into their happy places and where that they thrive. And at the same time, I also hear that you are also able to put in more for yourself too when it comes to learning on how to do that. What did you learn through that? Maybe I really like to stick with what we learn about ourselves, right? Because I think that's an important part of things. I think you talked about self-awareness as well. But what were you learning about yourself and what you liked and where you were thriving? And how did that help you help others? Because again, that was kind of your goal.
Yeah. Well, leadership is all about ourselves, really. It is about how we have self-awareness and develop emotional intelligence to meet people where they're at. Because a leader leads, right? You don't push them, you don't pull them, you lead them. They follow you, which means you're meeting people, you're meeting their needs, and you're inspiring them to do other things. And so in my time, developing there, I just learned a lot about what my strengths were, from a skill set perspective, and what, good corporate word, what my opportunities were. So what were, the things that I wasn't good at or I really struggled with. And as part of a, great corporate practice is having development plans where everybody, you've got to write every year, like, what do I want to do next year? What do I want to grow in? What do I need to just work on? Because it's not a strength for me. And that taught me a lot about the fact that I love to inspire. I love to grow talent. I'm great at assessing talent. And just getting into the hospitals, I'm incredibly competitive and can push too hard too, right? That's a thing I had to watch out for. And that the things that maybe I struggled with, my partner was great at, and how we could work together. And so what I love about this field, I don't think it's just veterinary medicine, but it's life and how you engage in it, is that you're never static. You can always keep evolving and keep growing and keep somewhat reinventing yourself as you learn something about yourself, like, oh, I really didn't know that about myself. And you get to choose what you want to do with that. You can lean into it, right? And so in that world, there's so much opportunity for growth compared to in the independent practice world. There's no natural support structure that pushes you into doing. Like if you're struggling, if you're failing, if you're frustrated, those are all motivators, or you just want to do better. Those are motivators, but it's all intrinsic. it basically comes from within. And in that corporate setting, you're just surrounded by that support, help, and an expectation that you will learn and grow, or you probably won't survive it because of the demands and the expectations of the job. So yeah, to pin down, make it exactly what did I learn about myself? There's like 500 things, maybe there's 5,000 things. And so let's go back to the imposter syndrome. I learned that I was capable, confident, and people believed in me, and that I could push to do more, even though I didn't see myself that way sometimes. Others did, and that I had ambition to drive and to do more and to become more, which, I did over time.
I think I shared with you, I had a question from an audience member about when you feel like you're ready for a change, how do you approach that and what do you start to do? Because I've heard you say that you can't develop your way out of who you are. And sometimes when you are struggling, it means that you're not in the right seat. So how do you balance with understanding what am I good at? What do I need to work on? And not focus too much on what we need to work on, right? How do you balance all that out to figure out what are the things I need to start doing to maybe make a change in my career path?
Yeah. I very much believe that to be successful in whatever role you're in, you have to be the right person for that job. So if you take on a role, however, right, by whatever means, and it doesn't align with who you are, like your intrinsic, your personality, what inspires you, what gets you excited, that you will be unhappy in that role for whichever reason in time, when the honeymoon wears off, right? And you really get into the day-to-day of it, is if you're not aligned with that, either if you can grow and develop and have the support you need to become that, fantastic. But if you can't, what are you going to do, right? You're just going to stick it out and just, let time pass and hope for the best that nobody notices, even though even if it's not a good fit. And people notice, right? Everybody notices. And eventually there has to be a moment where there's a conversation. But I always start with my clients that I coach. We always talk about the vision of who they are and where they want to go, because that is the foundation of all other conversations. So regardless of what issue they bring to me, we go back to, okay, 10 years from now, where do you see yourself? Magic wand, just take all boundaries away. If you could do anything, what does 10 years from now look like? Who are you? Where are you practicing? Where are you living? Who are you surrounded by? What does that life look like? And we take that and we put it into a true vision statement, and that vision statement may be very professional and about their career. Maybe it's also about their life, and personal. And that vision statement, then we work it backwards to, okay, vision is this. Let's put a long-term, let's make it more concrete. Let's turn it into a long-term goal, turn that into a shorter term goal. And then let's talk about what you're doing now to get there. And so through that, I think that's where you start to understand that what I'm doing today is not aligned with who I am as a person or where I want to go. And that's where I found myself at Banfield, because as much as I love that role and I sought higher positions over the years, and I went from a district to a regional to a divisional, and a national vice president role, I found myself uncomfortable in my chair. I found myself in, as much as I wanted to get there and thought I could do certain things and have a certain impact, it turned out that the actual skill set and the job did not align with what I most loved. As much as I tried, and I had coaches, executive coaches, I had peer mentors, I had so much feedback, I had a lot of development plans, and I desperately wanted to do better, right? And to find that magic bullet where I would just click it in and I'd get it. And what I realized after fighting that for 2 years, and I had a personal coach that was as a leadership coach, and she saw me through all of that. And I think there was just a moment where it's like, I can't do this anymore. This is not who I am, and this is not where I want to be. And she led me through a visioning exercise, which is where I wrote down in my wildest dreams, right? Waved my magic wand. It goes back to where I started. I'm teaching others how to lead. I'm teaching them how to work with their teams. I'm teaching them that they could achieve so much more in what they're doing, as a leader, as a practice owner, that they don't know, right? They just don't know how to start or how to get there. And that's who I want to work with, really. I don't, all the corporate stuff, right? It's great, but how am I impacting that frontline leader, that frontline owner that really wants to do better? Like, I really want to do better, but I don't have that corporate, support around me. I don't have all that. And it's just intrinsically motivated. So that's for me. And for who asked the question is, you can't just move away from something, right? You can't just move away from discomfort or stress or tension. You have to move towards something. Is what are you moving towards? Where do you want to go? Or you're going to find yourself in another place you don't want to be if you're not clear on, these are my values. This is what matters to me. This is what I'm good at. This is what I'm not good at. This is what I want to avoid. And do your best to find that role or that place that, as much as you can, meets those things that you really want to be and do.
So well said. And I don't think I've shared this on the podcast, but not only is making decisions moving towards a goal instead of just running away from something, because if you run away from something, you're probably bringing it with you, right? Like, you don't have it really thought
You
out,
probably
right?
are. Absolutely.
You don't know what you're really looking for.
Yeah.
And so not only is it good for the individual, but because I've heard people say this, people can tell when you're running away from something. I've had people who were interviewing veterinarians and they could tell that they were just trying to run away from practice. Unfortunately, it oozes off of you. So I think it is so important to sit down and think about, what do I really want? And I also want to bring in, yes, it's important to think about what you want in a career, like what do you like doing? But I think it is important to bring the other aspects of you into that vision as well.
Mm-hmm.
Thinking about family, those kind of decisions too, that impacts our career as much as everybody wants to keep everything so separate. It's not, because you're one human being that is complex with lots of things. And I think that's also important to bring in. And because you made this comment too, that some of your changes throughout the years were because of non-work related things.
Mm-hmm.
So I just want to share that too, is don't be afraid to kind of look at everything you like in that vision. There might be different parts of the stepping stones to get there depending on the whole thing. But I think it is really important because we are whole human beings with lots of things that are important to us that I think we need to account for. So any thoughts about that and how that has also impacted you?
Yeah, of course. And just a quick story as you talk about running away from something, Megan, is a doctor reached out to me that is in a corporate environment, and she very much wants to obtain a leadership role. And she feels like she keeps getting overlooked, right? She's doing the work, like she's being utilized to do the work, but she can't get the title. She can't get the role. And when I asked her to talk to me more about why did she want that, she just kept talking about, because I don't want this. I don't want this. I said, so what is it about that role that you want? She says, well, I won't have to do this thing anymore. I said, so, and as we kind of dug into it, and that was my feedback to her basically, is until you are really clear that you want that role because of this, of why, and that's it truly aligns with, who you are and your passions, I think you're going to keep getting overlooked because they can see that. You know what you don't want, but you don't know what you do want and why. And maybe you don't want that job. You just see it as an escape hatch. And you're going to end up in that role and you're going to end up more miserable than you are today because the pressure will be higher in leadership, right? It's going to get worse for you, not better. So she took that and she said, okay, thank you very much. I don't know what happened. I don't know what happened. But yeah, absolutely. It's so critical to move towards what you want so much, Megan. Anyway, so to get back on track with the personal side. So for me, my personal evolutions, when I moved from practice ownership to corporate medicine, was really career driven. I think for me, it was, family was stable and they were supportive of, let's go, let's move to another state and let's, go try this out. And then in 2022, when my role became so stressful and I had that moment where I said, okay, I just can't do this anymore. At the same time, so I had been through a lot of personal transitions during that time. So in 2019, I was promoted to divisional position. And then 2020 came. In the beginning of 2020, right, pandemic started. And so we're managing 1,000 hospitals through the pandemic. And I got divorced 1 month into that and ended up I was relocating. So left my now ex-husband behind, moved up to, the Pacific Northwest to Portland, and my daughter started college that year. So I went through like some significant, life changes. I've been married for 23 years. And, I moved out here kind of basically all on my own with a relationship that was kind of a volatile experience and, the PTSD that comes with some of that. And I find myself in this corporate role that is, I'm just trying to figure out, right? Like, how am I going to be successful in this? And an incredibly volatile environment on top of that because of the pandemic. So what I thought the job was suddenly not what the job was on top of that. So all of that played into who do I become next? Like, where am I going next? And what's important to me? Because what's important to me in 2022 was not the same thing that was important to me in 2011 when I took that role. And I had developed and changed a lot, and my life changed a lot. In 2021, I met my now husband. And so in 2022, I got married, and it's such a different relationship. His outlook on life is almost polar opposite of my ex-husband's. And my priorities in this had been developing over the years in corporate is because I really had to focus on my well-being in a very stressful environment. Meditation, mindfulness, incredibly important to me. Healthy eating, exercise were all things that were disciplines I had to develop in a corporate lifestyle because of the rigor that comes with that. And so my husband now is very much focused on that as well. So there was an alignment there. And what I realized as I was deciding, like, do I leave this job or not? Is like, I don't think I can stay healthy. I had chronic illnesses. I was on Ambien and they put me on an anti-anxiety medication just to get through my days and to sleep at night. And it was like a kind of a wake up call to be like, is this really how I want to live my life? And am I going to see my way through this? And so it wasn't. And so I decided to resign. And, I don't want anybody to think, oh, well, it's corporate, right? It's not. No, it was a lovely place to work. The people I worked with were incredible. I took on a very challenging role, and it just wasn't the fit for me. And I didn't know it until I got there. I just didn't know it. There's no blame. There's no regrets. There's nothing there. It's just like for anyone, I was doing something I was not meant to do. And I had to recognize that. So I decided to step away and I resigned. I did not have a safety net at the time because I needed to stop and decompress and try to figure out what I wanted because I didn't know what I wanted in that moment. And it was obviously big. I felt like there was this tightly wound coil up inside me. And once I resigned and I was in my backyard picking blueberries for months, it just unwound, that tension just kind of slowly unwound in me where I felt like I could breathe again. And I felt like I could think again and make healthy decisions for myself, and give myself space. So I went back to practice after not practicing for 10 years. I called it a practice down the road for me, a little mom and pop practice, and, said, hey, you need a vet. And of course it was the pandemic. So they needed a vet. And I, within a couple of weeks, I was on board and I was, refreshing my memory of the things I needed to know about practice. And I took about a year, and my coach had done this visioning exercise. And so I spent time just figuring out what that meant for me and developed my coaching business. Reality vet coaching and consulting is about all those things. It's about helping people be really happy, with practice ownership and see that they can do so much more than what they're doing right now, and helping them love the work they do. Or maybe if they don't love the work they do, helping them find out why and maybe transitioning into something else. So I'm doing that thing I love to do. And I feel like I'm really taking a big risk because I went from now this corporate space of being surrounded by a community, and help and all these knowledgeable people. And it's not that I'm alone, right? It's back that I work by myself, but there's that community around me as there always was, right? Like you. And like others that are out there that are doing exactly this work, that are lifting others up, and our coaches and our consultants and are in the veterinary community to help develop our leaders and develop our business owners. And so I have to work for it though. It's not just down the hall. I have to go reach out and I have to put myself out there. And I have to write and I have to speak and I have to publicly be visible and overcome that imposter syndrome on a very regular basis so that I can just keep growing in doing the thing that I love to do.
Yeah. I wanted to comment on something you had said about where you turned in your resignation and then took some time and you had to let that coil kind of unravel. I think that's also important too. I can speak for myself that sometimes when you're not sure what to do, you just keep adding more things on your plate.
Mhm. Mhm.
When sometimes we need to do less so that we
Mhm.
can recover and get to a point where we can think about things and not come from a place of desperation. And so I wanted to highlight that as well is if you're feeling like tight and you're not sure what to do, then maybe don't add more. See if you
Yeah.
can take things off so that you can kind of get to a better point where you can think and then add on the right things instead of just
Absolutely.
adding on to either distract yourself or I feel this gap, so I'm just going to fill it with, whatever I can. Like often we do that with email, right? It's like, well, I'm just going to answer all my email all day. And that feels like this weird gap.
On Facebook, right? Or you
Oh,
get on
yeah.
social media and you just start looking at reels and scrolling, and it does not make you feel better about yourself because you spent that time. For me, it was letting myself take a nap, or just stop and read a novel, sleep in a little bit, like little things that I just didn't do and didn't feel like they were part of my fabric. I allowed myself to do and not have that. I went from 10 hours of Zoom calls back to back every day. And that all just creates work, right? That you have to go do to where I had an empty calendar, and I took my mom to go see the doctor. I was like, that's cool. That's not something I could do before. But you're right. It's hard to turn it off, right? It's hard to give yourself permission to just be instead of just constantly do.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to acknowledge that because I think that it's hard. Again, I can speak from experience that I'm just a filler sometimes and I have to
Yeah.
like being pregnant is a great way to like be forced to sometimes sleep more and because your body is it just needs it. And so you kind of
Absolutely.
have to lean into that to be able to find out like what is the best thing for me. And so I'm glad that you did that and you are finding your place of where you're excited to do the work that you're doing. And because you've done this vision, you know what it looks like, and you've surrounded yourself with people who can help you get there. And I'm really excited that you're able to do that and it's making an impact in our profession because you're doing what you talked about finding that you fell in love with when you had your own practice. It was helping people thrive and find their place of happy and the right seat within the profession.
Yeah, absolutely. I am so thankful that, I know there's a lot of people that get up every day and they go to work and they go do a job and it's not a passion for them and it's not, it's just what they do. And I feel very fortunate and thankful to be in a profession and be part of something where a lot of us are here because we really love it. We really love what we're doing. And even though there's moments where I really don't love it, and especially with the burnout rates, is that it can become overwhelming. And, we definitely have to help each other, but we all, we're drawn in. And even people who aren't veterinarians that are drawn into this industry love being here, like, oh, this is the most amazing industry to be in. It makes me proud, to be a veterinarian in an industry that is so just amazing to be a part of, because we get to impact families through your pets. We impact global food supply. We impact public health. Like we impact so many things. We're just just an important part of our whole society. And I am very grateful to be a part of it and humbled to be a part of it.
I completely agree. Doing this podcast and interviewing people like yourself from all over veterinary medicine, it reminds me, like, I feel lucky that I get to be reminded of how special this industry is. And, another reason to surround yourself with people is to be reminded of,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
the
Yeah.
special parts of it. And you kind of mentioned this right then. You used the word, but I want to pull it out because this is the last question I like to ask people. And
Yeah.
what is something that you are really, really grateful for right now?
I am incredibly grateful for my family at this point, Megan. My husband is phenomenal and incredibly supportive and is teaching me a different me, teaching me like the next season of my life. For the first time in my life, I have my mother close to me. I have a brother close to me, and I've always lived very far away from my family. So I feel, very blessed by the family that I have around me, as small as we are. And it's one of many blessings, but it's every day I practice a little gratitude and, I just stop and reflect that, like how fortunate I am to have people that I love and love me. And I know that that's always there.